Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Samira Tilley, Marketing Manager at Assemble Systems. Our webinar today will cover how Columbia Construction Company uses Assemble and BIM in estimating. Now let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Tim Kelly, Senior Product Manager at Assemble. Go ahead, Tim.
Thank you, Samira. So just to kick things off, before we dive in, we'll go through our agenda. Today we're going to be following our typical format and run through some quick speaker introductions. Then we'll dive into some company introductions of both Assemble and Columbia. And then we'll walk through specific use cases, in this case within the estimating group. And then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. So to kick things off, I'll just introduce myself briefly. Tim Kelly, Senior Product Manager with Assemble Systems, which is now, if you guys haven't heard already, an Autodesk company. So we were acquired a little over a month ago now by Autodesk and working towards integrating our team into theirs and moving all things forward. But my background is in construction management. I actually come from a general contractor and worked in both pre-construction and in the field. And along the way, helped push the different processes customers use Assemble with today. So with that said, it's not about me today. It's about what Columbia is doing. So I'm going to introduce you to today's guest speaker, Siggy Pfendler. Siggy, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Siggy Pfendler, and I am the Director of Virtual Construction here at Columbia Construction. A little bit of background on me. I am a civil engineer by training, but I've spent my whole career on the construction side of the industry. I was lucky enough to get a huge variety of experiences through summer jobs in college, from being a laborer for a mom and pop contractor in the Rocky Mountains to working for the second largest general contractor in the world on a project site with 13 tower cranes in Berlin, Germany. But after I finished college, I started my career with a GC in the San Francisco area, and as a field engineer, worked my way up to a project engineer. And that was really where I learned how to be a real builder. When I moved back to the Boston area in 2007, I started working for Columbia as an APM and then into a project manager role. And in 2011, we created the Director of Virtual Construction role, and I've been building my department and our capabilities ever since.
And before I introduce Assemble, I have to say, man, 13 tower cranes on one project.
It was unbelievable.
Man, that's awesome. Fantastic. But so just a brief overview of Assemble for those of you not familiar. We do like to classify ourselves as a system of engagement, and that has a few different meanings, but kind of diving into allowing different users to engage in model content, model data, specifically in the construction space. We want to democratize BIM, make it easy for all of the team members to use it. And part of what that means is that data within a general contractor in construction is typically housed in different systems. And we want to allow for interoperability in connecting different sets of information into the model content, allowing for use, querying, filtering, organizing your information based on all of those different construction systems. So we really strive to be a useful, simple system that allows you to access the variety of pieces of information you need throughout the course of your construction project. A little bit about Columbia.
So Columbia is a family-owned business. We were founded over 90 years ago, so we've been around for a while. We're based in North Reading, Massachusetts, which is about 10 miles north of Boston, and we generally work regionally, so mostly Boston, the suburbs, but we also do some work in Western Mass and Rhode Island. We work on projects of all sizes, from very small to $200 million, but I'd say our average is about 10 to 30 million. We have a mainstream division that does a lot of work out of the ground, renovations. We also do have an interiors division. And interestingly enough, it's not always job size that dictates which division work falls into. It's the type of work more than anything. We do about 80% repeat business. So we are very focused on client satisfaction, starting in pre-construction all the way through closeout. We do work in a lot of different sectors, academic, corporate, healthcare, hospitality, life sciences, and energy. We're ranked as one of the largest construction firms in Massachusetts by the BBJ, and we are on E&R's top 400 list. We're a true construction manager and do not self-perform any work, but we generally take a lean approach across the board. We have strength and experience with sustainable projects. We built the largest geothermal system in New England and have 2 net zero energy buildings under our belt already. We use virtual construction to increase efficiencies and to minimize changes, which I'll be getting into a little bit more in our discussion about Assemble.
Awesome. And before we move on, I know you have some other stuff to run through here, but I'm looking at the photo here, and you guys have the job box with basically your coordination system on site. Is that something that's really heavily used for you guys?
It depends on the job, but we do find it to be really valuable. We have our job site kiosks that we have, you can see, monitor, computer, printer. The jobs that it works really best are the jobs that we've done full coordination. Superintendents will reference it, but even more so the foreman will reference it, so they can access the model, they can access the project documents from plans through submittals and RFIs, and all that information is right there on the job site, which we find can be really valuable for the guys in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. I know a lot of us see a lot of iPads moving out to job sites and use of models through iPads, but I love seeing these types of kiosks set up so that anyone that needs to dive into the kind of broader spectrum of model content, it's easily accessible. It's right there on the job site, and it really pulls people together. I think that's always fantastic to have the ability to kind of have an ad hoc meeting right there at the job box.
Absolutely.
Speaking of toolboxes.
More of a virtual toolbox. We use a lot of different technologies here at Columbia. Everything from our usual Autodesk tools like Revit, Navisworks, AutoCAD, and Assemble, I suppose, now falls into that category. But we branch out. You know, we really look for the right tool to solve the problem, as opposed to trying to force fit a tool into solving something, or perhaps forcing a tool into solving a problem that doesn't exist. We use SketchUp for presentations. I think nearly everybody in our company uses Bluebeam. Our project management system is an in-house system, which has its pros and cons. The programmer is right across from my office, so it's great, but he only has so much capacity. But overall, it's worked really well for us. It's user-friendly, and generally, our owners love it. But we branch into hardware as well. We recently purchased a BLK 360 Leica scanner, so it's been great to bring some of our scanning capabilities in-house, which we use with Autodesk Recap. For other hardware, we've also been using concrete sensors on some of our bigger jobs with concrete, which is getting us a little bit into the IoT part of construction. So we're always keeping our eye out for new tools that can help improve our workflows, like Assemble does.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to more broad use of concrete sensors and other IoT type devices on job sites. I think that's awesome to hear that you guys are watching that and looking at where that's headed.
Yeah, I think we'll see more and more of it as time goes by, for sure. So a little bit more getting into details at Columbia and how we do BIM and IT, because I think that's an important part of why we use Assemble. We have a BIM department of 3 people and an IT department of 3 people, which means limited resources for an annual volume of almost $300 million. It's not a whole lot of people to cover that work. So we run a fairly lean BIM process. We review every project at the beginning of the project life to determine the best use of BIM on the project. Where can we get the most value, and where does it make sense? We prefer to work with models that we get from designers instead of building our own. We believe this reduces rework and reduces our potential of introducing human error into the translation from 2D to 3D documents. It also reduces the amount of resources required. On the flip side, of course, working with a model that was created to produce 2D documents also has its challenges. And the result is, in order to use those design models for estimating, we have to be able to easily vet out the model, which Assemble really helps us do. And we will model a project ourselves if we have to. If it was designed in 2D and we decide that 3D coordination is really necessary, we will model it ourselves. We always captain our 3D coordination process because we think it's a critical part of success of the project. So that's really where we focus our efforts and resources, because we think we can get the most bang for our buck there in that part of the VDC world.
Absolutely, and just jumping in, you're kind of talking through, you mentioned using content generated by the AE team rather than building your own. And you said you guys have done some of your own model building, but and really the evolution of BIM for the construction industry and what you guys have done at Columbia. What would you say, so I know from my past, early on models were really hard to work with from the design team. There was a lot of rework to do, so we did a lot of our own building, and then we shifted as time and architects and engineers evolved in their capabilities in modeling. We stopped doing so much of our own and started leveraging theirs more. What would you say you guys do percentage-wise of your own modeling?
We do, I mean, it's really low, maybe 5%. We do very little modeling ourselves. The trick there, though, is to figure out what we can use the data for and what we can't use the data for, so we're selective about it. But yeah, with minimal resources, you can't. You can't spend all that time modeling. You need to really figure out where you're gonna get your most bang for the buck. So let me get into that a little bit. With a pre-construction process, this is a very important part of our whole construction process in our relationship with the owners. This isn't my group, this isn't my slide, but this department contributes to our high client satisfaction and repeat business rate, and it is where we use Assemble, so I figured I needed to give it a little bit of its due. Here at Columbia, pre-construction is very collaborative. We really work hard to get a full understanding of the project and eliminate all the variables so we can provide a clear and accurate budget to the project team. We are often brought on board during pre-con, and the architects already started, right? They're already down this path of design, and we are kind of running to try to catch up as quick as we can. And we're trying to catch up, but we also don't have documents that have a lot of details. So having the 3D model can get us caught up much more quickly than just having the 2D documents. Assemble really helps us tease through the information in the model, ask better questions, and clearly communicate our understanding of a project back to the design team and the owner. And the better questions we ask and the conversations we have, the better our budget will be. And our estimators find Assemble particularly helpful during the earlier phases of design. In a couple minutes, I'll get into one specific project with some very specific examples of how Assemble has helped our estimating team. But first, I'm going to take a step back and give everybody sort of a idea of what getting model data to our estimators without Assemble looks like. Back in 2011, we were really enthusiastic about implementing BIM wherever we could, so we trained most of our estimators in Revit, not full-on training, but a full day of training. We thought this will be great. They can model, they can create schedules, pull that information. It might not be a surprise to some of you that this did not turn out to be an effective way to get models and the information out of those models into the hands of the estimators. So back in those days, what I would do is we would get a model from the designer, I'd open it in Revit, I'd export it to Navisworks, I'd open both of the files on screens in my office, bring the estimators in, and we'd review these files on my screens. Sometimes they'd come with questions, sometimes they just want to come see what was there. So we'd sit down, we'd start digging through the Revit and Navisworks models, look at specific areas, maybe pull quantity, look at a property to help better understand the design, or maybe determine what questions they still needed to ask to fully understand what was going on in the design. Then I'd take a couple of screenshots to send to the estimator via email so that they could use them to help ask their questions. So this worked. It actually worked fairly well, but it was time consuming. For me to prep the models, for me to sit down with them, it really just sucked time out of the VDC department. And when it was just me, I didn't have a lot of free time. How do I get the estimators to be more comfortable with the models? In 2014, I read about Assemble or got a call from somebody there, and this description of a user-friendly interface to access the data in the Revit model seemed like it was too good to be true. So it was just what I was looking for and trying to keep an eye open, and Assemble came up with it. So now, what does BIM in estimating look like with Assemble? It's this really nice flowchart. So I get Revit models from the designers, I publish them up into the Revit model, into Assemble, and really from there on, the estimators are off and running. They use the model to visualize the project, for some quantity takeoff, and really to communicate questions with the owner and design team. Helps them illustrate their assumptions. They do tend to be careful with quantity takeoff, but when they determine that they can trust the model for certain things, they say it's way faster than the usual way. So, and it's also a great back check for quantities. So they'll go through the process their traditional way, and they'll bring up the model and pull out this data and be like, oh, okay, this looks good, right? Oh, or wait a sec, this is off. Did I miss something? So that they use it for a back check as well.
Absolutely. So in the case that you're already moving forward with the estimate, and this happens all the time, but you've started the quantity takeoff process, and then you've conditioned or organized your model so that you can, you've validated things, you can trust it, you can trust the quantities there. There are so many times that those things are moving in parallel that it's always great to have that different lens, a different perspective, even if it is just for that validation.
Absolutely. Okay, so this is the project I'm going to talk about to give you some examples for how valuable Assemble is to our estimators. And this is a project for a nonprofit organization here in Massachusetts. We built the building that you can see on the left side of your screen about 6 years ago for this owner. We developed a really strong relationship with them during the project. So when design on this new phase began, they asked us to help them out with some pre-con pricing and schematic design. As a little background for what this facility is, it's a 3-story building, has some offices, some conference rooms, and some workshop fabrication areas, with a high bay space to support some equipment construction, assembly, and maintenance. So pretty straightforward building, but still some interesting spaces. This is a rendering from the schematic design. You can see the high bay garage over on the right side of the building right there. And like I said, my estimators are a little bit hesitant to use quantities directly out of a model, but that doesn't mean that we can't get good value out of the model.
Even just to pause for a second, even the visuals, the isometric views that you get when the designer's actually using Revit and adding these to the plan set provides such a huge value for that quick understanding of what the project is, what it looks like.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But even then, right, when we're looking at 2D set, even with isometrics, it doesn't always give you that view of the building that you have a question on.
That's right.
Right? So on this particular project, right, you get the isometrics, you get a pretty good feel for what the building looks like, but the real information that my estimators need is on the 2D elevation. And for that hidden side of the high bay garage, right, that spot that's highlighted with the cloud and the arrow, that wasn't called out clearly on the 2D elevation. So my estimator had to make an assumption, right? He made an assumption that it was metal panels, put it in his estimate, and off he went.
All right.
So then, after that first they were reviewing the estimate, and it came up that the designers had a model, and my estimator said, oh, that's fantastic, would you be willing to share it? And they said, sure, well, we can share it, that's fine. So I got the designer's model, published it into Assemble, got it over to my estimator, and he was able to get a much better view of that side of the garage that he hadn't been able to see before. And it made it super obvious that, in fact, it wasn't metal panel, but it was curtain wall. So he quickly figured out that he had to adjust the estimate that he had given the owner. But what it also gave him is that he was able to quickly compare his original takeoff to the takeoff of the quantities that Assemble gave him for all the exterior skin. So he was able to say, oh, otherwise my exterior takeoff looks pretty good against this model, so I can trust that these quantities that are getting spit out by Assemble are good. So he was able to pull those in, plug them into his estimate, and send the owner a updated estimate very quickly and say, hey, this is what was going on. See this picture, I hadn't realized this is what it was. Now that I know that, here's the updated estimate.
That's great, and it often in that situation too, it almost opens up for whether it be value engineering or kind of, opportunities for adjustments in either side, the budget or the design. This provides a great illustration for everyone to be talking to the same components, the same part of the project, and understand the ramifications or the justification that might go on when saying, this material over this. And as an estimator or contractor, you might say, okay, this makes more sense in this space, and it really does open up the dialogue in that case.
Yeah, without a doubt, and it can give the estimators a real good basis to say, hey, if we change this in value engineering, this is the quantity, and this is going to be the impact of the budget. So, on to design development. The owner wanted a little bit more feedback, so we got the DD set. We requested the model again, and so I got that up into Assemble, and the estimator was very quickly able to see what had changed. For those of you who paid attention to my earlier comment about the high bay garage, you can notice in the inset in the upper left-hand corner that high bay garage is gone. That's the new model that we got from the designers, so it's gone suddenly. And when you pull that into Assemble, the compare function gives you a very good graphic, a quick review that, look at that, it's shown up in red, that means it's been deleted, therefore it's gone. What my estimator was concerned about, having realized that had disappeared, was whether the footprint of the other building had changed. And with Assemble, he was able to very quickly see, no, it hasn't changed. Therefore, some of my assumptions and quantities from the first go around should probably still be good. And it gave him a quick understanding of what had changed and what had to be adjusted in his estimate. The compare feature, like you can see in the graphic, provides a visual for what has changed. So red is in, deletions are in red, shows additions, it shows changes, but it also gives it to you in tabular form. So you can look at it both by the numbers and visually.
Absolutely, and that tabular form does give you, if it's going to summarize if you've got one type of wall that has additions, deletions, quantity changes, or types added or removed from that grouping. So it makes it really easy to get a summary comparison between those numbers.
It sure does. Okay, so a big part of this particular design development estimate was the envelope, the exterior skin. And this is a part of the model that our estimators use Assemble for regularly. In fact, the more complicated the exterior gets, the more useful Assemble is for understanding the scope and for pulling quantities. For example, my estimators love getting curved wall quantities from Assemble because they're sort of a pain to calculate, right? So if you can just click on it and get the quantity, they love that. Assemble can be also helpful with exterior walls that have multiple layers, such as screens or some setbacks that are kind of difficult to communicate in a 2D drawing. We generally find that there are some scopes that are more consistently useful than others in models from the architects. For example, my interiors guys like to pull light fixtures and door quantities from Assemble. And my mainstream estimators like to use it for structural, both for concrete and steel, and for exterior walls. In this particular example, you can see that my estimator color-coded the exterior walls, which is super easy to do in Assemble. There are 4 different types of exterior skin in this design. There are tactile wall panels, which are in orange. There are insulated metal panels, which are in green. They're precast in gray and curtain wall in blue. And as the estimator was going through and reviewing the model against the 2D documents, he noticed some discrepancies.
So real quick before we jump to the next slide, you kind of explain the color coding here, but can you talk about the capabilities in Assemble that gets you to this point? I just want to make sure we clarify that this is just a quick filter and color by properties. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's great. The tabular form that Assemble gives you the materials in, really you can easily sort it by type. So then all you need to do is select those, change the color, and you're off and running. It's a really great visual. I know my estimators work with, whether they're working in 2D or 3D, they like to work with color to show what is what, to give a quick view. And Assemble really allows that as easily, probably more easily than their 2D program that they use.
Sure, and yeah, we want to keep that flexible so that it is, whether you're looking at exterior skin or anything else by any property, it's super simple to use.
Absolutely. So one of the discrepancies that showed up between the 2D and the 3D when he started color coding and looking at it and sort of understanding the 3D that's in the model versus the 3D that he made in his head versus in the from the 2D documents was that this panel in the middle, the one that's clouded in with the arrow, it was modeled as metal panel, but the 2D documents had labeled it as tactile. And looking at the building as a whole in the model, it sort of made more sense for it to be a metal panel. So he gave the architect a call. He said, hey, I'm seeing this discrepancy. It doesn't really make sense to me. And the architect very quickly said, oh, you know what, the model is clearly correct. The annotation in the 2D document just hadn't been updated yet. So my estimator was able to adjust his estimate to appropriately reflect the design intent as opposed to what was shown on the drawings prior to the next submission of the estimate. So he was able to more accurately reflect the intent of the design. And finally, my estimator was running out of time before the last estimate was due. And in Schematic Design, he double-checked the 2D concrete quantities to the assemble quantities, and they matched up. So he was pretty confident that the design model had accurate concrete quantities. And as you can see in this graphic, that foundation wall isn't a one-level foundation wall. So the way to calculate that quantity in 2D is actually pretty time consuming. So he was able to very quickly pull those quantities out of assemble. The numbers made sense to him, and he was confident in them based on his previous review of the model, and he was able to pull them out, plug them into his estimate, and submit them on time. So assemble really allowed him to spend more of the time thinking and less of the time on the quantity takeoff part and still get his estimate in on time.
Perfect, because it is in those situations when you're in a situation where you've either got no data to go off of and you're going to use a subcontractor's number or a plug number based on gross square footage, or you can pull the relevant data and back check it, make sure things look good, and move forward with quality data.
Right.
I think that's fantastic to kind of illustrate.
So in summary, as Tim said at the beginning of the presentation, Assemble really has democratized BIM for my estimating department. It provides an avenue for quantity takeoff. It's great for visualization. And really, most importantly, it provides an effective tool for communication in our very highly collaborative pre-construction environment. It's added BIM value to the estimating department and helped free up resources in the BIM department, which is great for us. So really a win-win for Columbia. So thanks to Assemble, we are able to utilize our models much more efficiently.
Sure, and you talked about several cases where you need to pick up the phone and call the design team to have a conversation about some particular component, or through the course of the meetings that you guys have internally, you're using the visualization to drive that. And really that's the idea, is that it fits so many different use cases or workflows around getting quantity data out of that model and leveraging it for a lot of different applications. But I think in my mind, it always does come back to that first point you have there, which is the communication. It certainly allows for a deeper understanding on both sides of what's being reviewed, the type of information that's being leveraged, and really it does shorten that cycle where you're just staring at your screen, clicking, to quantify things in 2D. So it enhances that kind of back and forth between all team members, and I certainly love that aspect of the tool and love that aspect of what we're doing as part of the VDC space in our industry. So seeing what Columbia is doing certainly resonates in my mind.
Yeah, and I think it's also really important because when the BIM department is the gatekeeper to the model, we don't always know what's important to the estimators, right? My background is project management. It's not estimating. I don't know what's important to them.
Yep.
And when they have access to the model and they have a question, they can just pull it up and use it. They don't have to come to me. They don't have to track me down or one of the other BIM people. They can just go find it on themselves. So it really does make that information accessible to them.
Right, and I think from my past before Assemble or anything of this nature, like you mentioned before, you were using Revit directly and pulling information out of there. I have and my fair share as well of pulling schedules out of Revit, putting them in Excel, and sending the Excel files over to the estimating group. Then, just like you said, where they would be standing over your shoulder saying, what's this, what's this, what's the same situation where they, they're looking at line items and it's disconnected from the visualization. Just so to have those hand in hand where they can interact with that data and understand exactly where, that particular 100 square feet is coming from, what components associated to where that is in the project. It gives so much more to that quantity data than just looking at a spreadsheet alone. All right, well, I just want to go ahead and say thank you so much, Siggy, for kind of sharing what you guys do and taking the time to put together this content. I know that it takes quite a bit to pull screenshots and everything else together, so we really appreciate you sharing today.